Here are two examples of field effect zero voltage motors. Wonderful thermodynamic inventions from the past, the internal combustion engine and the air conditioner, involve energy cycles. We have a similar and less restrictive energy cycle here that we will call magnodynamic. It has the same perceived inefficiencies as its predecessor energy cycles, but may be more valuable to mankind. Before we get to an explanation, let's check in with Mission Control. Houston, anything from the Magnet Boys yet?
Apollo, they are just finishing their cake and say they are making great progress on the government funding estimates. They promise a number before they go home and watch TV.
Understood, Houston. Over and out. No surprises. We are still on our own. The cycle is simple. Vertical motions of these block rotors is along the lines of flux, and energy must be conserved. Horizontal motions involve those perpendicular forces that are unaccounted for. All of the individual reactions can be tested and verified for less than $20 each. The X-rays confirm that the forces are only generated when high-density flux is supported by edges on opposite sides of a gap. The cyclic equations are simple and make sense. With this explanation, we don't need any back EMF. Back EMF never seemed like a desirable thing. When I first heard the term in a classroom, my immediate reaction was, back EMF sucks. Why don't we use front EMF instead? I said it out loud, the class laughed, and the professor suggested that expressing such ideas was disrespectful and bordering on blasphemy. Last word was that he took a job in Houston. We will take a look at the all-magnet motor first. Without coils of wire, there is no place to generate Faraday voltages. It is also the easiest place to write the wrong equations for forces across gaps. The wrong equations usually start with the assumption that permanent magnets are exactly equal to electromagnets. That assumption is supported by the same erroneous data that equates electrons in a vacuum with electrons in motor wires. DC motors produce the same results independent of whether they use permanent magnets or a field coil. X-rays seem to indicate the equality occurs only in that unique application. Square rotors moving in translation make this application work. The reasons for this may be readily understood only by mechanical engineers like me. Run the obvious experiments suggested here, or trust me that the torque on the left will be cancelled when the blocks are moving in translation. It is first-year Newtonian mechanics. Containment of higher density flux is obvious on the right. Clockwise motion would reduce the density and energy in the gap, but the energy would not be lost. It would be transferred along flux lines to the block on the left. The transfer would have harmonics that could be dampened with a flywheel or other energy storage device. The configuration in this illustration uses two rotors and is diagrammed for two phases. 3 rotors and 3 equal phases would require a very small flywheel. That's another thing we know for sure. Let's check in with Mission Control. Houston, any news?
Yes, Apollo, $88 million. The Magnet Boys went home after they did rock, paper, scissors to see who would head the project. The winner questioned how long your supplies would last.
Message received, loud and clear, Houston. So here we are using a coil instead of a permanent magnet to shift the flux. High flux density containment is still the same. The enormous flexibility of magnodynamic technology is demonstrated here. The wires can go on either side of the gaps. The X-rays for all 3 options would look alike. My guess is universal equations apply to contain flux in air gaps. I am sure some of you are trying to figure out how to improve on this technology, and others are trying to figure out how to steal it. I doubt anyone is considering how much work is involved. I have fully understood translation forces for almost 40 years. I have known about the containment forces for almost 10. It took 2.5 years and approximately $50,000 for experimental models to figure out how to fit those 2 pieces together. Linking flux through 2 rotors instead of just one seems simple now. I can honestly say that I learned the requirement for 2 rotors by evaluating Murray's and Milo's unsuccessful experiments. I don't consider myself to be a genius, only someone willing to do the work. I will now share what's on the other side of the coin, obvious from reading the X-rays. Maximum utilization for magnodynamic devices is 50%, and the field power requirement goes up by a factor of 10. The X-rays show it. Counterclockwise forces are made impotent by increasing the size of the gap where they occur. Again, something we know for sure. My magnets always come with plastic spacers, so they are easier to slide apart. Field power requirement is directly proportional to gap size. Power requirements for the field are overwhelming for gaps over 5 millimeters, so that's near the ideal stroke for these devices. The other side of the coin for internal combustion engines is lots of pollution and perpetual profits for the oil companies. Here the downside is some copper wire that will last 100 years. You choose. The ideal stroke for gasoline internal combustion engines is 2 to 4 inches, but strokes of a ½ inch to more than 20 inches are used in that flexible technology. Jet engines evolved and broke the sound barrier myth with funding by governments with military interest and lots of taxpayers' money. That's what the Magnet Boys want to use. $88 million is a fraction of what was spent by governments on the Tokamak, now considered black hole technology because it was or is another back EMF type myth. $88 million and the money spent on the fission-fusion reaction theory can buy a lot of cake. My estimate is the stroke problem can be solved for $88K or less. No cake until the job is done. The Magnet Boys got theirs up front. Wait a minute, there seems to be another problem. Houston, we have analyzed the problem and it is obviously hens. Is the option of sending up supplies being considered?
Apollo, please clarify. Are you talking about chickens?
Affirmative, Houston.
We were not aware that there were any chickens on board.
Roger on the payload. No chickens up here.
Apollo, has someone up there come down with the avian flu?
Negative, Houston. We see the problem through the porthole. Damage to Earth. The problem is the little red hen syndrome down there for sure. Everybody wants to eat the cake, but nobody wants to do the work. The problem is unlikely to have a mainstream solution, so we are considering working on it up here. Can you send supplies?